I'm Heather.
And I'm Desiree.
And you're listening to
the Perpetually Overdue Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Before we get into this week's episode, Desiree and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the devastation of the wildfires happening in California. We're aware that our platform is not large, but we felt like it would be unjust to carry on business as usual and not acknowledge the tragedy that is taking place. Many people have lost all of their possessions, their homes, their animals. Some have lost their lives, and it's not something that we can just gloss over, regardless of how we help and contribute to the efforts. I wanted in particular to touch on a subject that is kind of a hot button issue right now, and that is politicizing tragedy. While I understand that there is a time and place, obviously right now our attention and our focus and our resources need to go towards the victims and go towards helping to contain the wildfire and to prevent future devastation. I don't think it is wrong to want to understand how this could have happened, why it is happening, and how we can better prepare or even prevent things like this from happening in the future. I understand that not all topics that are being focused on in the wake of this wildfire really have anything to do with the cause or effect. I know that DEI is being spoken about in reference to pilots who are risking their lives and using their resources to help contain the wildfire. It is sad to see that people are taking this tragedy and using it as an agenda to express their disdain or their opposition towards an issue that has nothing to do with these fires. I know the chief firefighter in LA is having to deal with her entire existence being politicized at this moment because she happens to be a queer woman, and people are questioning her ability to do her job. It has nothing to do with her qualifications and everything to do with her gender and who she chooses to love. These are things that are extremely abhorrent and should not be focused on in this moment, nor should victim blaming or taking the opportunity to laugh and point the finger. This is a time to come together, and this is a time to ask ourselves how we can help in any way that we are able to. Again, it's not wrong to ask how or why. So when speaking about climate change, when speaking about companies who are pumping millions of gallons of water out of California, when talking about the allocation of resources to the fire department being taken away and given to the LAPD, these are all directly correlated to this wildfire, and not discussing these things is what is allowing these things to continue on. Wanting to raise awareness, wanting to address these issues so that in the future, when wildfires do take place, we're better prepared. We can have the ability to combat these fires, to contain these fires before they get to people's homes. That is the most important thing. With that being said, we will add some resources to this episode of places that you can donate. Anything helps these people who have lost everything. It is so important that we show our love and that we show our compassion in any way that we can, even if it's just $5, even if it's just sending whatever is needed, material things that are needed for people, taking in an animal. These are all things that will help efforts, and that's what's most important. I want to take a second to just say thank you to all the first responders. Thank you to every firefighter. Thank you to the LA fire chief who are doing everything in their power at this moment to help the victims of these wildfires, to contain these fires. I want to thank all of the inmates who are risking their lives for pennies in order to help where help was not given due to budget cuts with the fire department. To the pilots from Canada who are coming in with their planes and helping to release fire retardant in places to contain the fire, to help get water in areas where the fire is burning. Thank you for not holding certain things against us and for helping innocent people, and for the hundreds of Mexican firefighters who have come into our country to help us. Thank you as well. It is truly It has truly been eye-opening and a really beautiful thing, because I know that in this moment, many people can use legitimate arguments to not help Americans. And the fact that those things are being put aside and people are showing their true colors in a good way, I hope it changes hearts. I really do. But thank you again for listening to this plea. And to everyone out there, I hope you are safe and I hope that you're doing well. And now to the episode.
Hello, Heather.
Hello, Desiree.
How are you this fine early evening?
Thank you for acknowledging that it's evening just in case, because you could definitely see a window but behind me. No sunlight coming out of that window.
I'm feeling vibey. I'm definitely embracing, as it's gotten darker now, as per some of our other episodes where we have filmed them earlier in the day. I'm able to play with my, like, you see my purple lighting. For those, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see our background setup. So I'm definitely feeling the vibes right now, especially for today's topic.
For sure. I'm going to need some like flickering candles at some point.
Ooh,
I
like
see
the ones you bought me.
Yes, I see those and I'm like, I like the vibes. But yes, I think for this topic in particular, all the mood lighting is very appropriate. But this particular topic that we're going to get into today has been super relevant, especially in the last 4 years, and has gone along with episode 1. If you have not seen or watched that episode, definitely head over to YouTube, head over to wherever you listen to your podcasts, get on that. And it was about female rage. So these two things kind of go hand in hand. But it's the idea of people and their divine feminine, which again, we talked about in episode 1, is not gender based. We all have divine feminine, men and women and non-binary people. But it's stepping into that and seeing it brewing right now in a different way than it has before. But we'll get into more of that later.
So some people may be a little perplexed by the title of this episode, and specifically the metaphysical aspect of the title, because witches has been an age-old caricature in stories, in media. So we will touch on that. But how about we break down, for maybe those who aren't familiar with the concept of metaphysics, let's talk about that for a second. The concept of metaphysics is actually thousands of years old. It's not a new thing. It didn't come up with the woo-woo trend. It's very much something that has been out there for a millennia plus. So it dates back further than ancient Greek philosophers. Discussions about the nature of reality and existence were present in ancient civilizations like Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, even before the term metaphysics was even a thing. So let's even break it down into simpler terms. Metaphysics is the study and philosophy of reality and existence. It studies what we are and what our purpose is. So essentially, it's the philosophy that questions the nature of the universe. Hence, a lot of times it goes hand in hand with both astrology and astronomy. And even though science technically doesn't currently, or at least not publicly, back the concepts related to metaphysics, there is a lot of overlap when it comes to quantum mechanics and neuroscience of consciousness. So it is very much something that has perplexed certain scientists and studies until they can give, I guess, concrete evidence. They won't claim something. Metaphysics is also very much a spirituality, faith-based kind of concept and reality. Speaking of spirituality, many who consider themselves to be spiritual, not religious, there's a difference, believe in the philosophies associated with these ancient curiosities and understandings of life. There's a little, nugget. It is a mouthful. And I think as we talk about it, I think we'll be able to break it down more where people will feel like they understand or realize that they have participated or believed in metaphysical spirituality without even realizing it, without knowing there's a name for it. So that's the first part of our title. But in our title, there's a second moniker that people find themselves more familiar with, as I mentioned, which are witches.
Yes, witches, again, like the metaphysics, is not a new concept. And we have seen it caricatured throughout our history, especially in media. And unfortunately, witches in general have gotten a bad rap throughout history, not just here in this country during the Salem witch trials, which, by the way, I went to Salem.
You did.
For Halloween, and I got to experience some of the places that unfortunately where witches were executed and hear some of the stories, and it's extremely wild and not at all what you would expect in terms of like actual witchcraft taking place. It was more about outlier women or people that had property that other people wanted. So,
wow.
Very interesting. We have a picture in our mind of what comes up. Like if you Google witch, you get like a sort of cartoony definition or a very like, ooh, stay away, bad, the devil. And when people claim to be a witch, a lot of people view that as a blanket statement, but it isn't a blanket statement. The concept of a witch or the definition of a witch is very personal to the person.
Yes.
So not every witch is Wiccan. Not every witch practices the same customs or rituals. There are so many variations of witches. Just to give a few, we have green witches. That's me. I'm at the beginning of my practice, but it's something that I am dabbling into now. Cosmic witches, crystal witches, eclectic witches, solitary or hedge witches, and some of those can even overlap. So there are elements of many of those practices that are intertwined, along with shamanism, Reiki, yoga, Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, and other types of what society would typically consider to be like magical practices. And again, it can be more of a religious, spiritual aspect of it, or like myself, a practice that does not include deities. Throughout history, holistic woman or a woman who does things naturally using natural means have been persecuted as being witches when all they've really done is heal people through, like I said, natural means. They've been labeled witch automatically and have either been put to death via burning or drowning, unfortunately. I believe that the concept of witchiness has great ties to spirituality and the metaphysics. Yes. Desiree and I have discussed it because we are on, I would say, parallel journeys, but they're not exactly the same road. But often we'll do this.
Yes.
You know, which we'll get into.
And for those who can't see us, intersect. They've intersected.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Not everybody is watching it.
So as Heather was saying, like, we're fairly new at embracing a lot of these philosophies and practices. We both found ourselves thrust into Christianity during our formative years. So it's safe to say, since leaving, we've had to work through a ton of religious trauma. Before we get into the discussion of where we are in our current spiritual journeys, let's actually give you a bit of our history, which started through religion.
And just to preface this conversation, I mean, there is a lot there. And it could be an entire episode unto itself, and maybe it will be.
I think it will be.
We're still currently working, at least I am, through a lot of religious trauma. And I've just recently found the resources to deal with that.
So we're actually going to very briefly
go
over some of this history. Just know we're giving you literally a grain of sand in a like beach wide setting here.
Yeah, this is not the Reader's Digest. This is even smaller than that. So
yes,
starting off with what drew us to Christianity. So for me, it was very simple without getting too much into my background. Being fatherless drew me to Christianity because I was told that there were certain promises or a certain way God interacts with the fatherless. There's even a scripture that talks about how he's the father to the fatherless. So that's one huge aspect. And I think the other one is just my innate nature and curiosity for the truth. And for the greater questions in life, like why are we here? What are we doing here? What is our purpose? What comes after this kind of thing? So that in a nutshell, I feel like is what drew me to Christianity. And the fact that we live in the United States and it's the predominant religion. So exactly. I heard about Christianity before I heard about any other schools of thought out there. What about you?
So again, long story, very short. One, we're both Hispanic. It is usually within the Hispanic cultures. Majority of them, you're born into Catholicism. Not all of them, but a lot of them. It just is. Like you get baptized when you're a baby and everything. And especially like I was born in New York, and so New York Puerto Ricans, it's like you're Catholic. Done. Already religious mindsets were kind of in the works in that area, but we weren't practicing Catholics. It was just a state of being because our ethnicity. There were aspects of Christianity that were introduced to me during middle school that I was curious about, but for the most part, it wasn't until high school that I really had the understanding of what I would choose to be a part of. I think for me, even though I too grew up without a father in my life, that wasn't so much what attracted me. I think for me, it was the concept of just this great love and community. And I think in part that has to do with one, I've always been very nurturing and mothering by nature. Like it's just something that's always been within me. Two, I think in part, me, whether you believe in it or not, me being a Sagittarius has a huge part in wanting to know the truth as well, as Heather was saying, understanding the truth and the bigger picture questions, because Sagittarius tend to be very much philosophers, into spiritual practices,
Right.
curious about those things. So there was definitely something calling to me of wanting to understand that there was something greater out there, especially after we die. And at the focus of it, I think it was this concept of this pure love that really drew me in.
Little backstory, Desiree and I actually met in the church that we spent many, many years in. I would say for me personally, between the ages of 16 or 17 until I think probably about 19. But then we kind of continued to follow each other every place after that. We bounced around for a little while. Then we both moved out of state to join this other organization. So I think in total, I would want to say that it was from about 16 to about 27. So almost 10 years of being steeped like a tea bag into Christianity, where the level of dedication continued to intensify with each passing year, to where it reached a point of almost being in like a commune type of community where you're in this very insulated bubble. And it's a 24/7 reality.
Yes.
The closest thing that I can sort of compare it to, but it's not a good comparison, is like a convent. But it's voluntary. Like nobody's forcing you to be there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's just like it takes all of your time and it takes all of your energy. For you, how many years was it in total?
So for me, probably just only a little bit longer because I started when I was 15. Remember, Heather and I are about 3 years apart. So for me, I went at 15 and it wasn't until about 28 that I finally got out. So more or less almost the same time, just give or take a few more years.
Yeah. And we both had our exit. We definitely did.
Yep.
And that is a huge, long story as well. I am going to make it as concise as possible in just a few sentences because it's something that we could definitely get into, like I said, at a later episode. But basically, what led to my exit was a bunch of circumstances, one of which I don't think I ever told you was you leaving.
Oh.
Because that just blew my mind. We were running side by side for so long, and we were so...
I switched the script on her.
Oh, yeah. We were so adamant that what we were doing and what we believed in was the correct way, the right thing, that for her to go, actually, I don't prescribe to that belief system anymore, was very mind-blowing to me. And so I think that was a catalyst that I wasn't aware of at the time. And
because
then I started...
just because for me, I was trying to be very careful and gentle about not rocking her boat as much as possible because I got where her head was at because I was not that long ago there. And Of course, there was also fear that I would lose her because now we had very fundamental different beliefs. And
Mm-hmm.
and so while I was figuring out my shit, I was
Mm-hmm.
trying to be very gentle about even my language. I didn't want to make things too abrupt on her end.
Yeah, and you
Um
didn't. You
so yeah, I
absolutely
remember.
didn't. Yeah. I think too is like it didn't have to be. You could have said it in any way and it would have had the same reaction. You know what I mean?
Mm,
It's still jarring
mhm.
to see that and hear about it, even in the most gentlest terms, because
Oh
it's
yeah.
not really about that. To be perfectly honest, I don't know if you could have convinced me otherwise. You know, like if even if you
Mm-mm.
had come to me and said, hey, what we believed in is not accurate, you should follow along with me, I would
Mhm.
have just looked at you like, no. I think what really sort of pushed me out the door, so to speak, was questioning a lot of the theology that I just did not agree with, primarily about the queer community. That was the thread that started to unravel things for me. And then it went even further than that, where I was like, okay, I can't agree with this because I don't think that this is a choice. And I think that people are just who they are. And I don't think that they deserve to be condemned because of that. And I don't want to be an active participant in that. So I have to completely separate myself because there's no way of staying 1 foot in and 1 foot out on this
Mm.
issue. Like, that's not how the world sees it. And that's not how people in the queer community would see it. And I just didn't feel comfortable cherry picking
Mm.
Christianity and going, this I'm comfortable with, this I'm not. You know what I mean? For me, that was the biggest thing. And then again, like it was the thread that started to unravel. So then it became even the most common sense thing to me of like, I believe in what I believe in as in like a sort of accident of geography. And had I been
Mm.
born in, let's say, a Muslim majority country, or had I been born in like an East Asian country, I would have believed something different, likely. And seeing other people, for example, Malala, who,
Mm.
hearing her story, seeing how dedicated she was to Islam, I was like, I can't look at this person and go, you're wrong, I'm right. And
Mm.
because you're wrong, you're going to be forever in a river of fire. Enjoy that. You know what I mean? Like
Seriously.
it just didn't feel right to me. So that was like sort of my exit. And I know you have your own story as well.
Mine is a little harder to fully explain, but the gist of it was because it was a lot of little moments and a lot of internalization that culminated to this one big moment. And so for me, I think it began, I had someone very close to me pass away, very close to my family. And I very much, the following months leading after his death, there were things that began to challenge my understanding of what truth was. And there were things that were being done for his soul that were not Christianity approved. There were things then later on, little by little, things that I was told not to believe in. My mother was like seeking out tarot readers for things. She was having people who, or like they weren't prophets in the Christian sense. There were
Mm-hmm.
things that were happening literally leading after his, that I was like, wait a second, but we don't believe this. Like, wait, no, this isn't what we do. Like, there are very
Mm-hmm.
clear foundations we're supposed to stick to. And
Yeah.
I'm a very black and white person. So even though I will internally question things, I may not voice those things, but I'm definitely having thoughts. I also, for my mental health that I didn't know I struggled with most of my life, I need things laid out very clearly so that I know what's expected of me, so that
Mm.
it helps my anxiety to not be just thrown in the wind at that time. And so suddenly everything I believed in was being challenged. And I was going through obviously a very huge emotional, time in my life in the midst of all that.
Mm-hmm.
So as the months went on, a lot of things just slowly stopped making sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fighting that because I was very much comfortable with what I've already established in my life. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
28 years old, I made religion a career path. Like,
Yeah, we both did.
yeah, this was very much something I invested the last 10 plus years of my life. I gave up a
Mm-hmm.
lot of other normal routes into adulthood for this thing I was told was the way to live life. So I was very much fighting what was starting to happen internally until one day I remember I was sitting on my desk, and I don't know what I was doing online, but it's like something clicked. And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't even something I wanted to click, but every fiber in my being suddenly knew with a certainty that everything I had thought was true wasn't. That everything I had given myself to, Christianity based and just Bible wise, all of it, every fiber in my being was like, they're wrong. And that's not right.
Yeah. That's a hard pill to swallow, let me tell you. Because I think a lot of people don't understand. It's like some people leave Christianity and they leave in a huff. Like they're like, I'm through with this. I'm sick of this shit. And, that wasn't our situation. We were like ignorantly happy in our situation. We weren't actually
Yes.
happy, but we didn't know any other form of happiness outside of this. So we thought we were happy.
Yes.
And to have these doubts come in and to have all of these things come in that like logically we couldn't just reason away anymore.
Yeah.
Not that we ever tried. Like it wasn't like we went through a time of like lying to ourselves. We truly believed everything at that time.
We did.
To have that,
we had every good intention. Every good
yeah,
intention.
totally. To have that taken away was actually heartbreaking. Like
Yes.
we both went through a mourning period, grieving.
And I mean like legitimate. Like that's not even like a joke statement. Like we literally mourned, needing to like walk away from what we thought we knew.
Yeah, because our identity, our purpose, everything that we knew was wrapped up in that. And it was like starting all over again. Like we were just boom, coming out of the birth canal of a new creature. And it was incredibly scary, but at the same time, it was sad. It was really sad.
Yes.
And then the religious trauma starts to unravel, and that is challenging in and of itself and is a part of our journey afterward.
As you can see, there is a lot to delve into. And as Heather has said, we most likely will definitely, this was such a major part of our lives that not only do we want to talk about it because it was a major part of our lives, but we genuinely believe there are so many out there who would understand, who can relate, who may just need to hear like, you're not alone. And so we will touch base on breaking down more about our religious traumas and experience in a further like later episode. But for now, after having that glimpse of where we came from, where has our journey taken us since?
The pipeline from Christianity to green witchcraft. Obviously, there's no one way of doing things. I think there were a couple of mile markers that I'll just touch on very briefly. One, I started to make friends outside of my Christian bubble. And with that comes a lot of different perspectives. So I had friends from all walks of life, asking questions, dabbling in their own forms of spirituality. And initially, I just shelved it. I shelved all spirituality. I just didn't want to unpack the trauma. I just felt like if I just ignore it, it'll go away. Not true. There were many nights where I cried myself to sleep, but I think the ability to trust myself and to trust my judgment on any form of spirituality had been broken so severely that for me, there was a time that I was closed off from any of those types of perspectives. If you had an answer for why we are here and how we came to be and all of this stuff, it was like in one ear, out the other, don't want to hear about it because
I remember.
I didn't feel comfortable putting my eggs in any one basket anymore. I had done that and I did that wholeheartedly. And so it was like, there was the question of, can I trust myself to know what is the right way and if there is a right way? So it took me a long time to even touch the subject of spirituality. I think my first little dabble into it, similar to you, was tarot. I had a friend who did tarot for me. I'd always wondered about it because I've always been attracted naturally. I would say more so than I was attracted to Christianity. I felt like that came about out of my brokenness. Whereas with this form of spirituality, with green witchcraft, which relies very heavily on nature, that was something I felt drawn to naturally, innately. And that was the one place after I left Christianity, when I was going out hiking and I was in nature, where I felt a sense of godliness, I guess you can say, or like something bigger than myself, a sense of oneness and connection with something outside of myself. So nature, it was always been there for me and always pulled me in. Now, of course, I was also like, just ate up every piece of media that gave me those fuzzy feelings of magic is real. I mean, I'm going to get on a broom and fly away. But I was almost heartbroken about that, because I was like, well, that's not real. You know what I mean? And so for me, it's not about I'm going to make something manifest in a physical sense you would see in a Harry Potter or Charmed, or I'm really aging myself now with the Charmed reference.
So
It
good.
wasn't so much that as it was when I started to learn about witchcraft and it being a practice as opposed to a religion. My personal practice does not include deities. That was something that I decided was for me, because I still can't connect. I believe that there's a source of life, but I don't necessarily believe that it's this one thing and this one thing only. So for me, the practice of it was about self-empowerment and looking inward. I've always had a razor sharp intuition that I was almost taught to ignore as a Christian. Christianity is a lot about self-sacrifice and denying yourself.
Yes.
And I needed the opposite of that. I wanted something that made me feel empowered and made me feel like I could tap into areas inside of me that were always there, just waiting for me to acknowledge and to knock on the door. My intuition being one of them, being so strong when it comes to knowing, especially people's character. I feel like I've always been a really sharp judge of character. But again, because I had been taught for so long to deny myself, to deny my worth, I am nothing without Christ. Stepping into this other form of spirituality or practice, I felt like, okay, I am building the trust back up again. I am building real self-love now. And I am in charge of my own destiny and my own fate. And it's no longer reliant on this specific religion or this pathway, but it is me, myself, and I going on this journey, which I think is what I needed. And I still have so much to learn, so much to delve into, but that is pretty much the gist of it. What about you?
Man, that was good. Yeah. So much I was like, oh, yeah. Same as with Heather, there's a lot, but maybe some of the key milestones. Because following the devastation of suddenly coming to terms with my life is a lie,
For real.
it took a few years. It was a bit rocky for a few years after that, because as she said, literally had to start over, guys. Like literally. Suddenly, this career path completely went out the window. So what the hell do I do with myself now? Do I go back to school at 28? What do I even want to do? Especially as a creative person, that's always been a difficult decision to make, what to pursue exactly. So there was a lot of self-discovery and healing required, and that road was bumpy for a while. I've dealt with a lot of chronic health issues since I was little. For the first time, actually started embracing and understanding my mental health struggles that didn't have a name all my life. I was going into my 30s, suddenly putting a name to those things and trying to advocate for my health. And so I entered that journey for some time. And then around between 2019 to 2020, right before everything shut down and we were all kind of navel gazing for a while, there were little aspects. My mother was the one who was more adventurous in her spiritual practices, even though her language comes off very hardcore Christian. She's very open-minded to many things and has very much dabbled in a lot of things throughout my life that I was more closed-minded to when I was a Christian. I was very like, no, we don't believe that. And she didn't give a shit. She did what she was going to do because she had years on
Good
me.
for
So,
her.
yes, I admire the shit out of my mother. So, she was already kind of like reaching out to some tarot people. And suddenly I wasn't as rigid minded anymore. So, I was kind of like curious. But
Mm,
it wasn't until officially 2020 when we were all face to face everything about ourselves, about who we are. There was an overall trend that I had noticed on social media. Suddenly, people who had never, not once since I have followed them, ever mentioned tarot and spirituality were suddenly posting about that. And I found it interesting because I was dabbling in that and I thought I was alone. But suddenly, all of these people were all looking at the same things. We're
yeah.
all searching for answers within spirituality that was more open to the metaphysical aspect of that we're a collective consciousness, that there
Mm,
is way more than just the 3D aspect of living here on earth, but that there's a 5D consciousness and all of the things that unravel with that. And discovering that, like you were saying, we have more control of our destiny and our lives and what's to come. And it wasn't reliant on one deity, one person, one, religious mentality aspect. And so I felt like as a collective, everyone was feeling very like free to explore and ask questions,
mm,
which encouraged me to keep doing that as well. There were many things I started kind of dabbling into, um, further from tarot, and little by little following my own instinct. It was one of those things that even learning, here is a word that became trendy and everyone plops it on. But for me, it's actually something I took very seriously, which I realized genuinely I was an empath. Now, a lot of
mm-hmm.
people, claim that they are. I don't know that every single one of them who claims they are, but I know that it was a huge revelation because I had read a couple of books and suddenly so many things made sense about my
Mm-hmm.
life, even my mental health struggles coinciding with being an empath, because I've always been so sensitive to people around me. And one of the things that made it difficult in my friendships, even with Heather growing up, was that I would know things without understanding how to explain how I know them. So I would become very passionate about wanting to help someone not go that path because there's a fork in the road and they can choose this way. But I'm like, no, I know what this way is.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be happier if you go this way. But that's not life. People are going to do what they do. And so
Mm-hmm.
when they chose to go through the lessons that they needed to go through, I would feel the intense emotions and I would feel them too strongly to the point that they were crippling for me and they
Yeah.
affected my relationships. And coming to understand who I was as an empath was very freeing because suddenly I had the knowledge that that is not my responsibility. I can
Yeah.
feel it, I can see it, but that is not my role to play.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's karmic path is their own,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to be okay with just letting them do what they need to do. That was because that was a very
Oh, I
hard
have
lesson.
intimate knowledge of how you felt back then and
Gosh,
not really fully understanding it myself,
I
but I
didn't
knew it
either.
came. Yeah, that's true. I knew it came from a good place. I knew that it didn't come from you wanting to be controlling, but at the same time, it did end up coming across that way because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, and I get the feelings of feeling overwhelmed about it, but not being able to sort of wash your hands from it and go,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I've said what I needed to say. I told them what they needed to hear, and now it's up to them to make that decision. It's like you see
Mm-hmm.
somebody on the train tracks and you're like, get out of the way. You know what I mean? I think something that was very fueled by Christianity too, of like,
Mm-hmm.
you have to help save other people.
Oh
You have a
God, yes.
duty to do
Mm-hmm.
that. So I think that something that was like naturally innately in you was like almost aggravated by
Yes.
being
In
in
the wrong.
Christianity for so long.
Yep.
And I will say too, like, I forgot to mention really quickly, in that time of not really wanting to address religion at all, I had a relationship. We ended up moving in together, and he introduced me to aliens. He introduced me to NDEs, which are near death experiences, past life regressions that people have had. And I would listen to all of it and I would take all of it in, but I never really affirmed or denied any of
Mm.
it. I just thought it was all very interesting and it was all knowledge that I was getting. This is well before 2022.
Mm-hmm.
The seeds were already sort of being planted at that time. And I do remember getting into yoga and meditation, because
Mm.
meditation isn't that far off from prayer, which we had been immersed in for so many years. It felt like an easier transition, which came with learning more about yoga as an actual spiritual practice and not just
Mm.
as an activity that you do for fitness and breath
Mm-hmm.
work and things like that. So there was a lot that was sort of being sprinkled into my life that I felt like later on sort of pushed me in this direction.
Yeah. So it's interesting because we're giving you such tiny little descriptions of all that we have been opening our mind to and studying ourselves and coming across. And like Heather said earlier, it's always been interesting because even if there was a time where we weren't on the same path at that
Mm-hmm.
moment, we always found our way somehow to intersect again without
Mm-hmm.
trying. I actually remember, because I was now suddenly, after 2020, I was getting more into tarot and oracle cards. I was buying my own. I was shuffling them for myself. I was, learning more about metaphysical spirituality and all that stuff. I didn't know where Heather was with any of that, or if she even heard of any of that. So we never
Mm-hmm.
talked about it for a time. And it wasn't until one day she brought up, I think, about tarot cards, and suddenly was like, my God, can we talk about this together now? And I got so excited and
Wasn't
realized
that weird though, that we
we
never, because like
never,
it never was a thing of like, I can't say this to her or she
no,
won't understand. It
mm,
just never came up in
never.
conversation, even
Mm,
though we were actively searching, learning, participating in certain things.
yep.
It just, and then it happened, I believe, when it was supposed to happen.
Agreed. Absolutely. Because it was, I think we were both at the right place in where we
Mm-hmm.
were with all that to finally come together and kind of like compare notes and encourage it within each other, and for each other. I remember being so excited that this was now a part of me that was growing, that I could
Mm-hmm.
share with her. And then also find it fascinating that it just so happened we found our way back to a common belief again. So it's been something that is ever growing, because there are so many avenues with even metaphysical spirituality, just like with witches and practicing being a witch and witchcraft or anything like that. It's not black and white. It's
No.
different for every single person. Even though there are a lot of common beliefs and teachings and understandings that come with believing in the metaphysical, it still very much relies on you, your own intuition, your own inner journey. That's been something that I have been embracing. And the beauty of it, see, a lot of you may not even realize that you've been practicing metaphysical spirituality, because a lot of tools that are associated with it are crystals. Why are crystals part of metaphysical spirituality? Is because if you believe scientifically, that's been proven, that everything has energy. There's an energy frequency that gives off of anything. Crystals that come from the earth have various energies, frequencies. So there's that. There's, like Heather said, meditation is a practice in any type of metaphysical spirituality. Aromatherapy,
Mm.
candles, journaling, tarot, as we mentioned, breath work, nature, rituals, astrology, even astronomy. All of it kind of coincides and have connections, let's
Yeah,
say.
you're about to ruin a lot of things for For some people, they're like, shit, this is part of that. I gotta get rid of it. Interestingly enough, even when we were deep in Christianity, I feel like the one practice that has to do with another form of spirituality, the metaphysical, that a lot of people accept is astrology. People reading their horoscopes in the back of magazines, and you know what I mean? It might be like baby little steps. It might be you're just eating baby food in terms of astrology, not getting super deep into it. But there are so many things within our society that are just sort of universally accepted that we don't know are part of some sort of spirituality that a lot of people would condemn, not realizing that they're also dabbling in it themselves.
It's funny because there are curiosities out there. They just don't realize that they're tapping into curiously certain things, because I think there's a comfort in not taking it too seriously, being curious enough, but not really taking it too seriously to feel like they're gonna claim anything, or they're going to become a caricature of what they assume anyone who believes in any type of metaphysical spirituality. Even when we were Christians, we were taught New Age people are the devil.
Yeah, and then there's also the depiction of that type of person or that trope within media of how many documentaries have we consumed about cults, and there's always some new agey spirituality that's
barefoot
like a mixture.
hippie.
Yeah, that's like a mixture of a bunch of different things. I think what helped me in accepting a lot of the things that just felt naturally okay for me was one of two things. One, I took an edible one day and I got significantly high, and I had this epiphany. There are times when I have weed in some form that I just think I'm fucking Yoda from Star Wars and I'm just spouting this deep philosophy. But I had this moment where I was just like, you know what? We're all right. Like, all of us are correct. Nobody is wrong. Everybody is correct. I mean, in the sense that we all have our separate journeys. And if you need to believe this thing in your journey, that's your journey. So go ahead and do it. Yes. You know what I mean? And I'm going to do what I feel is correct. And neither one of us is wrong, because our journeys are different and we're different people. And that was huge for me. I thought that I had just solved all the world's problems by coming to that understanding. So that was like a defining moment for me. But then I also realized I don't have to make this my entire personality. I still enjoy many things that have nothing to do with spirituality at all. You know what I mean? I have a full life outside of that. And I think before, when I was a Christian, it was actually more culty than I am now, because now I enjoy many different things, whereas before all of my interests were focused in one direction.
And also to say, even though we went to multiple places and organizations, at the end of the day, there was always a singular man who was the center of it all, who was the one we had to look up to, who was the one with the infinite knowledge above everyone else below them that we had to follow and honor and respect. So that made it even more culty. We didn't process at the time.
Well, yeah. And then, you know, again, this is for a different episode, but one of the things that we were taught in that context is not to question that person.
Yeah.
So it took a lot of, which is why I'm like, I love my practice, because it doesn't center around one person telling me what the truth is. I'm experiencing life and I'm experiencing it through this lens, and I get to make those decisions for myself. So exactly.
I can choose what feels right for me. Don't have to accept the whole pot. You can just scoop out the things that feel true for you now. And the beauty of it is that it can be ever changing and evolving.
Yeah.
And there's no timeline, there's no set anything. And I think your edible epiphany was actually huge because now, if you also believe in the metaphysical aspects of spirituality, then you potentially believe in past lives. You potentially believe that this hasn't been your only life. This may not be your last life on this earth. And with that comes the understanding that even more so, everyone's journey being different and all religions lead to more the same conclusion if we're paying attention. But because, like Heather said early on in the episode, you can't help geographically where you're born. And that's going to influence your culture, especially religion wise. So you can't blame anyone for where they land. Everyone has to go through the avenue that they were set to go through in this life. And that's going to look like whatever it needs to look like, because everyone's karmic path is different. Everyone's karmic ties from past lives, from future, are different. When she told me that, even though subconsciously I was lined up with that, when she put words to it, it was like a eureka moment for me too. And I was like, yes, that really is it. Because again, of my past that I shared with you guys, that gives me more liberty of letting go and allowing people to live what they have to live through, whatever that looks like, be it in different religions, whatnot. What I'm going through right now in my spiritual practice, I don't have to pull people into my journey. I'm going through this for me. It just so happens that I get to go through it with my best friend, but I wasn't going to try to yank her my way, because that's not what this is about. It very much is a personal, individual experience that then spreads out as a collective.
Do you know how many times I've had that wonder or that thought in my head of questioning of supposed prophets of different religions? And I'm like, what if they had just kept it to themselves? Like, what if what they learned was just for them? And not to create an entire religion around to further divide humanity. It's very interesting to think about, because I feel like I have had my own brush with knowledge, my own brush with experiential knowledge specifically, that I don't necessarily feel the need to like shout from the rooftops and turn into a belief system. I just feel like it's for me personally. And honestly, one thing that really helped at the beginning, and I'm just putting this out there just in case there's somebody else of like, where do I even begin? There is a book that I highly, highly recommend that anybody read. Doesn't matter what you believe in, what you don't believe in. I just think it's good for everyone to know. It's very informative, and majority of it is informative. It doesn't really have to do with personal beliefs. It's by an author, forgive me if I mispronounce this, Reza Aslan. And it's called God, A Human History. I would say 95% of this book is just going through the earliest known human civilizations and what they believed God was. So, what their personal belief system is and how they might have come to believe that. And it goes through, I want to say it starts with the Sumerians and it goes all the way to modern day. Wow. And then I would say the last 5% is him talking about his own personal journey with spirituality. But to get that perspective of so many different belief systems throughout history, and then even realizing Christianity is not the oldest religion or belief system on this earth, was really eye-opening for me. What you said earlier about how all religions might be pointing to the same thing, he actually says that in that book too. And there's a word for it, and I am very sorry because I do not know what it is anymore, but it starts with the letter P. But there is a word for sort of like all paths lead to the same place, which is very contradictory to how we grew up, because in Christianity, the Bible says there's only one way to the Father, and that is through Jesus. So I found that to be really fascinating. And then also learning like, oh, so Egyptian theology is very, very similar to the whole Christ savior story about, you know, somebody being sacrificed and then brought back to life and stuff. And there were so many parallels with other belief systems and religions that I almost felt like, this is my personal opinion, people are going to come for me, I know this. I almost felt like Christianity was pulling from other more older religions to this sort of amalgamation of the Christ story. People are gonna say I'm gonna burn in hell for saying that, but whatever. But yeah, so many things started clicking for me and making sense for me.
And that's the thing, like, we want to create a safe space to challenge our own minds, not each other, our own minds, and be open to different thinking in that sense. As it is, I personally believe we're not supposed to know everything, because the whole point of coming to this earth and having our experiences here is to have very much a human experience. Now, to a certain extent, I think that we are given glimpses because we need them to empower us to bring like-mindedness together for the greater good of love. And I mean like the purest love. Because if you really think about it, so many religions, at the end of the day, even if they're trying to point to a certain deity, the foundation usually always ends up surrounded by the concept of love. As we go through these very human experiences, the goal is to wash out all of our karmic messiness and find ourselves back into that 5D consciousness of pure love and light. That's a mouthful. That's something we can get into another time, of course. But again, I want all of us to just be open. It doesn't have to look a certain way for everyone. It is okay that it doesn't look identical from person to person to person.
It's not for us.
It's not for us. Yeah.
There are things that you've told me that I'm like, I don't know, you know? So like it doesn't.
Yeah.
But we've been able to have healthy dialogue around it. And I think it's also because we're not a part of this exclusive group that if you're not a part of it, you're a danger. We are able to have healthy, constructive conversation without feeling threatened by what the other person thinks. And I think it comes from that understanding of we're all on our own separate journey kind of thing.
Yes. And then with all that, if you thought we forgot about the whole witches aspect, really a lot of why we probably also are looked at as being witches is because we like to burn Palo Santo. We like to burn sage. We like to have our crystals and do all these witchy, vibey things that people just automatically also coin you as witches. Me, I don't mind being called a witch. I don't know that I am, unlike Heather, who feels very drawn to becoming a green witch. For me, I, at the moment, don't have any tie or purposeful practicing of witchcraft of any sort, but I do witchy things. I make manifestation bottles. I make moon water. I do things that are considered witchy. I just may not have a specific name that I identify with at the moment.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
And that's okay, because you know why? Again, that is your journey.
Exactly. I hope today's episode was a little fun. We kind of went into some heavy stuff like our religious trauma backgrounds, but in addition to that, if you are someone who maybe didn't realize that you practice your own spirituality that may be connected to the metaphysical, well, maybe this was like a cool little introduction for you. At the end of the day, we just wanted to share a part of ourselves. We wanted to connect with anyone else who was like-minded and maybe is searching for community within the same concepts of spirituality. And that is the whole point. If you listened to our episode 1 about feminine rage heard around the world, this is a time where everyone's feeling like it's a time to find community. People are searching for their truth, their journey within that. If we can be a part of your community, you can be a part of ours, then we're here for it. We love it. We encourage it. And that's why we were excited to make this episode.
Yeah. And we obviously want to talk about this more in the future, but this isn't the only topic that we are going to talk about. We're going to talk about literally everything under the sun that you can think of. And this is a part of that. It's a part of who we are. And we are just here sharing our lives and our stories with everyone else. And we want to hear your stories as well.
Yes. Be sure to find us on social media. We're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, we're on Threads, we're on TikTok. But I think Instagram and YouTube might be the best places for discussion. So definitely go check it out, follow, subscribe. Connect with each other as well within the comment section. Wherever you're listening to your podcast, make sure you are also subscribed. Leave us a review because that really helps other people find us who are interested in our content. And we want to keep building this community. Thank you guys so much for another fantastic week. We have been having a lot of fun. Feel free to give us ideas about anything you want us to talk about.
Like Desiree said, please go to Instagram and go to YouTube. The discussion for the week is, where are you at with your spiritual journey? If you have a spiritual practice, what kind of witch are you? Are you not a witch? What are you doing? We just want to know where your journey is taking you, the things that you've learned. Let's start a discussion. And we will definitely be participating in the comments as well, just reading them, interacting with you guys, because that is the point of this podcast, is to build community. Thank you guys again for listening. We love you guys, and we'll see you next week.